Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany. Welcome back, or welcome if you've never been here before. Today I'm here to give you some Fated Mates recommendations. This is in collaboration with Hannah Blackwell, who I absolutely adore and I'm very excited. Please go ahead and watch her video along with me. I will be sat taking notes because she reads very broadly within this genre, or trope rather, excuse me. I'm just excited to see what she's going to be giving us. I am a reader that's really fond of fated mates who fight the bond. I love the microtrope of a reluctant pairing. And if I'm in a paranormal or fantasy, I want to feel like the powers have some synergy, that they make sense when it comes to their bond. And if I'm reaching for the stars, quite frankly, in any romance, I want to feel like their HEA has a systemic change on the society around them. That's like my catnip. And I'm telling you this to give you an indication of what I'm going to share with you today. I want to start out with a mini stack of books that I found to be fresh and unique in terms of what I was picking up. And then in the latter half, I'm just going to get into my favorites, books that I have talked about from series that I love. So let's get into it. When I think of fresh, I thought it would only be fitting to start out with this book, and that is Obsidian Feathers by CaCeras. This is her debut romance. It's dark fantasy. It's also paranormal, and it has cultural and indigenous representation, especially when it comes to the paranormal elements and lore. And we are dealing with shifters. I don't want to reveal what kind because I was gobsmacked by that. Oh, I loved it so much. We're following Angie, and she has been stripped of her ancestry, her land, and the remembrance of who she is. And that is very much a theme that I thoroughly enjoyed in this book. She is in an arranged marriage to a man where it's more of a merger than it is about love. She is under the control of her tyrannical mother, and she's living an affluent lifestyle. I mean, she's comfortable, and she's on a business trip in El Salvador where she runs into a man who knows who she is, and he goes about wooing her and coaxing her into remembrance. It's also a very sexy book, okay? It's going there. And it has a lot of political tension when it comes to the paranormal factions. There's some trauma. This is dark. This is a dark fantasy romance, and I will leave it there. Okay, I completely bought their romance and her journey of becoming. I will say that. I highly suggest you pick it up. I got this recommendation from Cynthia from Kindle After Dark, as well as the next in this stack. So let's continue with Fairydale by Veronica Lancet, because there's a similar linchpin between them. And let me be coy as I break this sucker down, because this is a behemoth. It's clocking in at nearly 800 pages if I remember, and that's not where the investment lies, because the romance of this really took me out in terms of its devotion and just the theme of the ills of humanity when buffeting fear and the unknown. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad that she didn't break this thing up into pieces. This is a dark gothic fantasy. It is truly something unlike anything I've read. Also, the commitment lies in not knowing for about 45 to 50% of the book. You are following Darcy Sullivan, who is in the 1950s. This is also historical. She gets a message from a father that she never knew, who's willing to give her an inheritance if she can show up to his funeral in Fairydale, a town that shouldn't exist, a town that she can't find on the map, a town that no one knows where she should get off at the train when she actually decides to go. And when she arrives, she shows up to mess. Okay, family drama. People that don't want her there, they want a cut of that inheritance as well. And she also starts to entertain a romance with Caleb, a man that sort of ushers her into the fold, shows her the ropes. That's the corporeal romance. She's also having these vivid and illicit dreams of a man who she believes to be in alignment with the woman who could have stayed at the home that she's being hosted in. There is a tonal, stylistic, and I just thought it was shift. And it just had range. I felt like this was a fresh Fated Mates romance with a strong message. Highly recommend. Also, I'm gonna have to bring up a shorty with girth, as I would call it. I am very fond of a novella, and when an author can hit long strokes, I'm talking make use of a short amount of pages, I take note of that. So that is Blood and Vows by Kate Easton. I can get in, get out, and I also just have never read a Bloody Mary retelling, while also giving me a fully fleshed out world without it being insta-lovey, and the romance felt earned. That's really what took me out. In this sort of felt like urban fantasy because magic is rumored or known of. The heroine was always told by her mother to never venture out to this part of town because of the magic that is rumored to be there, except she goes there on this day after the loss of her mother, after she finds her boyfriend has cheated on her with her best friend. She goes to this pub, and after not sticking to the rivers and lakes that she's used to, she's summoning our hero. And it gets into her backstory, why she failed to heed these ominous warnings, and how this turns into a portal fantasy and just anatomy that I'm very fond of. Okay, we're dealing with horns and tails that are used expertly here. And also a heroine that's not only curious, but asks questions, and like I said, a fully fledged world. I was here for their romance, and it felt earned. That's all I'm gonna say because this is on the shorter side. But I mean, I highly suggest you give it a gander. It's short, it was fun, and I was here for it. I apologize if things are different. I had to change my battery. I also feel like we're bridging the two stacks here, where the next two are favorites, and I also think that they are fresh and unique. Let's start out with Desire in His Blood by Zoey Draven. This is the first in her Brides of Kylor series. We're following Azor. He is the High Lord of the Kylor. They are these vampiric berserker aliens with a large wingspan, and he's hell-bent on revenge, where he's in an arranged marriage with Gemma, who has been at the helm of her family, willing to put herself on the auction block in order to assuage the debts that her father has placed her family in. And what I loved about this book is that it felt like it was a historical in space. Gemma is human, doesn't know much about the Kylor, and she's not willing to give him her fear. She's willing to make this deal to keep her family afloat, to take on the position that her father should be for her family, for her sisters. And I also love how they're both really learning and unpacking the full scope of their bond. It's the tension and the vitriol. It's the slow burn that's beyond the physical elements that they're both coming live to. That really works for me in this book, as well as the Lady of the Manor trope. I love that she completely turns his world upside down, and vice versa. There's also a well-plotted, almost a mystery that is uncovered. This is giving royal vibes. This is giving duty and honor and all of that. I love this. So lastly, I guess, for this first little part here is Safe Word is Devil's Snare by Shaya. This is a Harry Potter fan fiction, as well as arranged marriage between Hermione and Neville. This gave me the Neville I never knew that I needed. You can read this on Archive of Our Own. I will have it linked down below. And I would argue that this is Fated Mates due to the Wizarding World's attempt to push back on the reproductive rates after the war, and their trial run of a matchmaking program, obviously induced by magic, where one's counterpart will glow. Your greatest match, your best pairing, will glow by magic, and they're aiming to do this and really forcibly get volunteers before enacting a marriage law. And so obviously Hermione's greatest match is Neville. They're paired together. She volunteers for this program, and I mean, he couldn't be more thrilled. Yet at the same time, he's a bit nervous because of some of the activities that he thoroughly enjoys in the bedroom, and yet Neville as a hero completely took me out throughout this romance. The way that he advocates for Hermione in this book. She is a recent divorcee, and the way that he suits up and shows up for her in just all areas completely took me out. And so even if that element hadn't even been brought into the chat, because we get through a large portion of this book before that's introduced, I was already shook, smitten, and just kind of sold on him. So by the time we get there, it just feels so freaking right. If you're looking for a Harry Potter fanfiction and you're willing to sort of branch out, I highly suggest that you try Neville. This is it. Now these next few are all book 2s within series that I love. So I feel like the sequel can hit. Starting with Hydrous by Amara Rae. This is the second in her Immortal Coven series. Now, this is following Naya. She is the leader of her coven. At the beginning of this book, I'm telling you, it read like a freaking film, because in the first book, we do have a lot of world building. I'm not gonna lie to you. I feel like the second book slapped when it came to the action-packed opening, where they are quite literally dropped, invited to, if you will. It's a setup by this corrupt council of witches. Think Gladiator. Think these bad hybrid witches are coming out here, and Naya is the leader of them out here fighting down corruption in shield mating fashion. I'm talking she's flipping, she's taking suckers down. And while doing so, Finidor, Finny Fin Fin, the Blood Fae King, is present. He's been told that it is there he will find his mate. And so he's watching her, he's clocking the curves, twirling, twisting, and jiving, and carrying out incredible feats, right? So they enter into an alliance and an agreement because he needs his mate in order to aid his people. And she needs him in order to buffet this corruption. These witches are mad, okay? They're incredibly powerful. And the fact that Naya is attracted to him is something that she's willing to buffet on behalf of her girls, okay? And I just love that because, again, a microtrope that I really love is when characters are reluctant to fall. They're not really checking for love. Like, he knows that she's his fated mate and he's willing to toy with her. He's described as Psycho Sunshine and he's very much that. But it's really not about that. Like, he's willing to, like, duck and jive. It's not about the love. It's about the alliance for both of them. And yet, oh, there are just standout moments in this book. They're both incredibly stabby. They're not sentimental beings, and yet there are just moments in here where I absolutely swooned. It is incredibly earned, and so the systemic change due to their love, it had all of those markers that I absolutely adore. And so if you started this series and you weren't sure about pushing through, I highly suggest that you do and you get to this romance. It's absolutely standout. Highly suggest Hydrous. And another book 2 that I stand by, in fact, I think it might be my favorite within the series. I adore Isidore and Devraj from Don't Hex and Drive, from Juliette Cross's Stay a Spell series. I almost didn't get that sentence out. Oh my gosh. But I just love Devraj. He is a 300-year-old vampire, once a Bollywood actor, and Isidore is the introvert of the family. She is a conduit. She is a healer. She is far more comfortable taking care of animals at the shelter than dealing with people. And at the beginning of this book, Devraj is moving to New Orleans to help out an old friend in Vampire in Power that we meet in the first book. But he also just so happens to also move right next door to her. And so it begins this sort of slow burn and just needling romance, which is just like, it's so comedic, but it's also these like beautiful acts of care, just like these little things that he does for her that sort of like whittles down her defenses that I absolutely adore. Just like magical love notes in here. The cooking, it's just so freaking sweet and swoony. I absolutely adore them. And this is also a book 2 that hits. Another book 2 that I believe hits And I adore this series because it doesn't take itself too seriously. And that is The Time I Got Drunk and Needed a Love Potion at a Werewolf by Kimberly Lemming. This is book 2 in her Mishap Mead series. Okay. And this is following Bree. This is Cinnamon's best friend. Cinnamon is in the first book. And I mean, the title just tells it like it is. Bree is trying to thwart this man's advances in the pub. So she tries to throw her drink. It misses him and it hits our hero, who just so happens to be a werewolf. And when it happens, he locks eyes with her and knows her to be his mate. Yet, she's not really trying to hear all that. She's not really checking for love. And she's not really believing that she is his mate because she believes it to be the love potion. So while comedic, I do think that this novella does a compelling job of covering the topic of consent in a very interesting way. I love that he's willing to convince her that he's here for the long haul. So we're dealing with some abandonment here, consent, we're going on another quest. That's all I'll say. If you have not picked this series up, this has one of my favorite fantasy characters of all time, who is Alexis. And I always say, if she were in corporeal form, she would be stealing all of the heroine's men. If she were real, she would have my life all the way together. She is crass, she's forward frank, she's gathering every seed as she's stealing it. I love Alexis. She is definitely the comedic relief for me, and within this series, I highly suggest it. I don't know why, if you haven't picked this up and you're at all interested. They're on the shorter side, they're fun. Another second book within a novella series, and one you could read for pride if you have yet to get to it, is Tentacles and Triathlons by Ashley Bennet. I love this series. This is MM, it's a monster romance, and it's following Cyrus and Reese. I adore Cyrus. He is I think he's eons old, a kraken. Cyrus is also a cinnamon roll and he's an artist. And when he first meets Reese at the engagement party of the couple from the first book, he knows Reese to be his mate, but he has this all locked away inside. He keeps it to himself. He is secretly pining. And Reese is there to celebrate his sister. This is set in a world where humans and monsters are newly integrated. Reese has had a few experiences that were not the best with monsters in the past, and so he's making an effort for his sister, and Cyrus agrees to help Reese train for a triathlon, and Reese is going to be using his new brother-in-law's gym in order to train. And so now Cyrus and Reese are going to be forced into proximity, and Cyrus is nervous and wants to do his best to make Reese feel comfortable and aid in his confidence. And it is just such a sweet and swoony romance, and I was expecting it to be very spicy, but I wasn't expecting it to be as like heartfelt as it was when it came to Cyrus and his backstory, and when it came to where their like romance actually went. This one really surprised me. So if you haven't read it and you enjoy MM romance but don't feel like monster romance is your cup of tea, I would highly recommend this book because it has a softer touch and a heavy uppercut of swoon. Just saying. I would like to wrap up with another monster romance series that would be fitting for Pride, and that is The Rycke by Lily Mayne. This is from her Monstrous series. This is set in a post-apocalyptic world brought on by the influx of monsters into the human realm that has resulted in chaos, where the military is now aiming to capture them and retrofit their abilities in order to take them out. It has also resulted in what they call raiders, those who do not want to join the military as soldiers. They are venturing out on their own, either banding together to survive in camps or taking their chances out in the wastelands. Think of just like flat desert earth with danger lurking at every corner. Or there are those who are living in the cities with very minimal help and aid from the military. In the third book within this series, we're following Rycke. He is living in one of these raider camps, and he is really heavily relied upon within it. He is going out on one of these missions out in the wastes, which is very dangerous. And on one of the missions, he comes across the Rycke. The Rycke is a monster within this world and of his that is not even known to his own kind. He is the last of his kind. That's all I'm going to say, because if you've started this series and you haven't made it here, I do not want to spoil anything. He is regal, and he's also dealing with immense trauma because of the military and because of all of the testing and because of all of the hate and all of the fear, and it is their romance. It's incredibly beautiful. And his kind is incredibly feared because of what humans don't know about him and because of what other monsters don't know about him. I absolutely adore this book, and I highly suggest that you pick up this series if you have not yet. It is fully fledged. It is just an entire world, darling. What are you doing? Anyway, I want to thank Hannah for asking me to collab. I want to thank you for being here with me today. Please consider subscribing and sticking around. Please leave some recommendations down below. If you're catching a theme of the books that I shared today, please let me know of some of your favorites down below. I always love a good rec, okay? I don't think I'm ever going to get through this TBR. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.